Well, I'll be, he muttered, reaching for his phone. That fellow's back. Third time this month. Something's just not right. It was a scorching June day in Duncan, South Carolina. The maintenance engineer at the Hampton Inn had been watching a white septic truck pull up to an old Denny's restaurant. It's been closed for 2 years now. He called 911. Within minutes, Lyman police found the driver with his hose snaked directly into the grease trap. But here's the problem. A grease trap sits between the kitchen drains and the sewer, catching fats and oils before they hit the system. Somebody has to pump that grease out, and that's a legitimate job. But this guy, he wasn't pumping anything out. He was pumping waste in, using a closed restaurant as a back door into the public sewer. Why was he doing this? And more importantly, what exactly was in his tank? Welcome to The Outfall, the podcast that documents and shares untold stories about our water and infrastructure world. Today, how one man's shortcut triggered a multi-million-dollar cleanup, a federal prison sentence, and forced an entire industry to ask important questions. 6 months before that 911 call, a lab technician at a wastewater utility in the upstate was running routine tests when something alarming appeared in the results. PCBs, industrial chemicals so toxic they were banned in the 1970s. Known carcinogens that persist in the environment for decades. Sue Schneider was the chief executive officer at Spartanburg Water System, which includes both the water system and the Spartanburg Sanitary Sewer District. In June 2013, her world was about ready to be turned upside down.
Spartanburg Sanitary Sewer District was doing its normal activity. We do testing prior disposal of sludge. And we did our monthly testing. And lo and behold, we got a hit on PCBs. What's with that? PCBs haven't even been manufactured since the late 70s, and they certainly had not been in use. And like anybody else, you assume it's a lab error. There must be something wrong. So send it out for retesting. You need to check this again, because surely offsite lab, this is the wrong answer. And then it came back with that answer. So we had to do a number of things all at the same time, going different directions. We had to make sure that our staff was properly protected just to do their everyday operation and maintenance around the facility.
The discovery triggered immediate alarm throughout South Carolina's environmental agencies. PCBs should not have been in the wastewater system at all, let alone at these levels. And the scale of contamination was staggering.
And for those people who are familiar or not familiar with wastewater treatment plants, you can't just stop. Upstream of the plant are residents, subdivisions. There are commercial businesses like restaurants. And there are certainly industries. And on this particular plant, the Lower North Tiger River plant, it had all of the above. A lot of waste coming down. And so while we didn't want to keep accepting contaminated waste, we also couldn't stop. Since we couldn't stop accepting, we needed to find some way to divert the contaminated sludge out of our tanks that we had on site and begin storing it so that we could figure out what to do with it.
So Spartanburg faced an impossible situation, toxic chemicals in their system, but no way to shut off the sewer flow.
You have to keep the plant operational because the world is operating. So you have to figure out how to divert the sludge that came in out of that and start storing it. So we ended up with a total of 36 frac tanks. Frac tank is a large tank. And fortunately, we had room at this site, and they hold 20,000 gallons. So we were able to move that contaminated sludge into 36 frac tanks, which, by the way, when you do the math, is 720,000 gallons out of a digester that holds 800,000 gallons. The other thing was, are we still being contaminated? Is this still happening? So again, you're doing a bunch of things at the same time. In total, when all was said and done, we had about 1.2 million gallons of PCB contaminated sludge on our hands that we had to deal with.
As Spartanburg scrambled to contain the contamination, they reached out to other wastewater utilities in the upstate. They weren't alone. 2 other utilities had also detected PCB contamination, and one of them had a critical lead.
The best lead for us came from Lyman. Lyman let us know that they had, in fact, caught an individual who was surcharging into a grease trap. Surcharging meaning not pulling out, but instead is pushing in.
That tip changed everything. Instead of searching hundreds of manholes across the system, investigators could now focus on grease traps. The tip about the closed Denny's restaurant gave them a starting point.
We were very concerned because of even the sheer number of manholes within the lower North Tiger River system, which is not one of our larger systems. But getting that tip about grease traps really allowed us to focus.
By August of 2013, wastewater utilities across the upstate had been forced to cease land application of biosolids and were scrambling to implement emergency measures. In September, the Department of Health and Environmental Control issued an emergency regulation prohibiting the land application of biosolids with any detectable PCB levels. For wastewater treatment facilities across South Carolina, the contamination created an ongoing crisis. Treatment plants had previously recycled the biosolids as fertilizer, now had to landfill them at enormous expense. The contaminated sludge had to go somewhere. Spartanburg negotiated with both EPA and DHEC on a cleanup plan.
We weren't sure if we'd have to incinerate the material on site, setting up a portable incinerator, whether we would be able to go transport it some way, or, gosh knows, get into a long-term storage of, here's a box of stuff. Don't open it. So what we did is, as we worked out the plan, we were ultimately able to go ahead and have the material transported multiple states away to a federally certified landfill that can take PCBs into Emile, Alabama. It was a very, very, very difficult transition for the restaurants in our community to have to lock down. Most people don't know when they drive up to a restaurant and maybe look at a typical fast food restaurant where their grease trap is. If you're particularly in our fields, you might notice, but they ranged from anywhere to being literally, and I have a photo of this that I used to use in a presentation, literally right outside the window where you pay to pick up your fast food, to way in the back of a grocery store. You know, they could be various places.
Wow.
And we were giving people specs on how to lock down what they had, making sure they understand if they wanted to continue to dispose with sanitary sewer district, we couldn't take that risk anymore of having that kind of an incident or our staff at risk. And so they needed to lock them down.
Meanwhile, federal investigators were building their case against the individual caught behind the closed Denny's. They found PCBs in a grease trap, and in the tanker itself, they had their connection. What they never determined was where the PCB originally came from. Nearly 3 years later, the driver stood before a federal judge. He pleaded guilty to 2 counts of violating the Clean Water Act. A South Carolina utility representative addressed the court. His actions caused our employees, over the course of at least 2-year period, to spend countless unplanned hours and holidays away from their families and children in order to deal with the impacts. And that is something that no amount of justice can ever restore to these people. At sentencing, the judge didn't mince words. The defendant's conduct reflects a callous disregard for the safety of the environment, including plant, animal, and human life. All of this was done for the simple motive of greed. The sentence, 18 months in federal prison and a $10,000 fine.
End of the day, total cost that Spartanburg Sanitary Sewer District had, along with just adding in the cost from that one restaurant, came out to be about $2.5 million to do this full cleanup. For us, that meant delaying other capital improvement projects because all of a sudden that's a big chunk out of your budget that you didn't think was going to occur. But if you looked at standard commercial cost to dispose of a 55-gallon drum of PCBs, it would have been, if properly disposed of, about $6,000. So that improper disposal created such a contaminated mess that it cost us $2.5 million to clean up.
For Sue, asked about the lowest point of the entire ordeal, it wasn't the contamination itself. It was what came after.
Probably the hardest part was not getting the reimbursement back from insurance that we felt we were due. Anyways, despite a lot of efforts in order to change the mind, the settlement was what the settlement was, and that meant the utility and our constituents had to pick up the cost. You know, essentially they're paying for the cleanup. They're delaying getting improvements to the sewer system from projects that we had planned. So to me, that was a pretty difficult pill to swallow when we felt that we had documented everything. We had overcome the safety issues, overcome finding the source, overcome getting rid of the material and resuming normalcy. But at the end of the day, it was a tremendous financial hit that we had to absorb too. And that was probably one of the lower points. Life isn't fair, but when it's not being fair to you, it's particularly difficult.
By June 2019, 6 years after the initial PCB discovery, Spartanburg Water announced the long-running dispute over insurance claims related to the contamination had finally been settled. The State Insurance Reserve Fund agreed to pay the utility $675,000 for cleanup costs, which is far less than the $2.1 million actually spent on the remediation. The saga of illegal dumping and contamination had finally reached its conclusion, but the impact on the community would linger for years to come. When asked about lessons learned, Sue's answer was sobering.
One lesson is, and I think our industry needs to be very aware, is in the case of wastewater treatment, operators, maintenance people, anyone who is working in maintenance throughout that whole system, you have no idea what's coming down the line. And so to ensure that they have the proper safety equipment, they're trained on procedures, they have, again, continued training on what would be both expected and perhaps unexpected hazards that they could encounter.
Here's the thing. A wastewater system is a promise that what we flush away won't come back to harm us. That promise only holds when everyone plays by the rules. Thanks to Sue Schneider for spending time with us and sharing her story. The real story is about the vulnerability of our infrastructure and the hidden cost of environmental crime and the dedicated professionals who work every day to keep our system safe. And with that, we wrap up Season 7. Thanks for joining us this season, for listening, for sharing, for caring about these stories behind our water and infrastructure. We're going to take a short break. We'll be back. If you haven't already, subscribe wherever you get your podcasts so you won't miss our return. And if this season meant something to you, leave us a review. It helps more people find these stories while we're away. Until next season, stay curious.